Sweet. Cool. So if you had a chance, we got some notes for the second session sitting in the back, but we're going to go ahead and get started. You guys have fun with Gaga? Wow. that was dead. Let's try it one more time. You guys have fun with Gaga? Okay, people liked it. Cool. Wait, I want to start out with 4 questions to ask everyone. First, how could there be only one true religion? Second question, how could God be good with so much evil in the world? Third question, hasn't science disproven God? And then fourth question, how could you believe in a God who sends people to hell? I think those are 4 of the biggest questions that people are asking of Christianity in our generation. So what I want to do in this talk is walk through why should we care about answering those questions, and then how should we actually answer those questions. So we'll walk through a little bit about apologetics. So I want to convince you both that you need to use apologetics, but also I want to give you some tools to put under your apologetic tool belt. And so the way that I'm going to try to do that is at the end, we'll come back around to those 4 big questions, and I'll try to give you an answer for each one. But with that, I want to make this personal of why this actually matters for me. I remember one Tuesday night, I was sitting in the dining hall on campus with some of my buddies, grabbing dinner, and we were talking about our lives, and then I brought up the gospel, and we had this conversation where we were talking about, okay, who is God? God is holy, but our nature is sinful. Christ died in our place. Our response should be faith to be saved. We get to the end of our conversation, and these 2 guys just stare at me. Right? Awkward silence. Then one of them breaks the silence and says, well, that's fine that you believe that, but I don't see why that would matter for me. So needless to say, I kind of left that conversation feeling defeated, but I realized something. I had no tools with which to share the gospel with skeptics. Right? As much as I love this whole God, man, Christ response model, I think it assumes a lot of things about the people we're talking to. It doesn't answer some of their biggest questions, as in, okay, who is God and why would I even believe in him? Okay, why are you Christians being so judgy with these things that you call sins? And like, why in the world would I trade in my reason for your faith? I realized that to be more effective in evangelism, I needed a way to share it with skeptics. What I needed was apologetics. So maybe you're sitting here, and that's the first time you've ever heard that word. I want to answer that question for you. What is apologetics? I've got a definition here for you. Apologetics is the practice of offering an appeal, that's your first blank, and a defense for the Christian faith. As in, apologetics is both a shield and an extended hand. So apologetics is a shield that when people want to attack Christianity, they're asking questions, how in the world could you believe that? Apologetics is a shield that we hold up to defend our faith. But apologetics is also an extended hand. It's a way for us to say, hey, won't you come and believe this with me? So we are making an appeal and a defense, with this being the goal. The goal is to clear away the debris of doubt and skepticism to make a path for the gospel to be heard. That blank right there is gospel. So apologetics is not evangelism. These are 2 distinct different things. The goal of apologetics is to clear away this debris of doubt and skepticism to make a path for us to share the gospel. The gospel is the goal. The gospel is what changes people's lives, but apologetics is a tool we can use to actually get to the gospel. I want to go ahead and cite my sources here at the beginning, so give credit where credit is due. The first 3 sections of this lesson come from this book right here, Apologetics of the Cross. It's been really helpful for me. Kind of gives an outline of like why should we care about apologetics in the first place and like how do we do it? And then the 4 questions I'm going to attempt to answer at the end, I'm going to model my responses after this little book right here, The Reason for God by Pastor Tim Keller. So 2 really good resources. that I would love for you guys to read. But to continue to make this personal, I remember at the beginning of my sophomore year of college, an older gentleman on campus asked me, hey, do you want to come to this engineering apologetics meeting that we're doing? And 2 years ago, my response to him was, I just want to share the gospel with people. I don't see the purpose of apologetics. As in, I'll share the gospel, and I'm trusting that the gospel alone, right, that's what people need to hear, so I don't need anything else. So, needless to say, that is not the response he was looking for. But I think if I could go back and talk to sophomore year Kyle about why does apologetics actually matter, why should you actually use it, this is what I would tell him. First, a biblical reason. The Bible uses apologetics. I'm going to give you a few of them, but there are many more. A few apologetics that the Bible uses. Creation, miracles, historical evidence, fulfilled prophecy, personal experience, the Holy Spirit, answered objections, and pagan sources. So those are a few of the things that the Bible appeals to say, here's a reason why you should believe this gospel that we're telling you about right now. Right? But even in addition to a biblical reason, we actually have a historical reason. It's that the church has always done apologetics. That's your blank right there, the church. I want to give you a few examples. There are many more, but I want to give you some of the highlights of some of the most famous apologists in Christian history. First, Augustine. He showed that Jesus is a real person. He's not just a symbol. He's an actual person who died in our place. Theodore Cura. He argued that Christianity provides for the best flourishing of the human race. Thomas Aquinas, he showed the validity of Scripture to defend Christianity. John Calvin, he argued that creation reveals God, but people need the inner witness of the Spirit to believe. John Henry Newman argued that Christianity is probable. Cornelius Van Til argued that Christianity must be presupposed to be understood. Dorothy Sayers, she used stories to defend Christianity. And C.S. Lewis appealed to human longing, imagination, and reason. So I think we have a clear historical reason. The church has always used apologetics. I think to circle back around to that conversation that Tuesday night in the dining hall, I had a conversation. I was able to catch back up with that guy and talk a little bit more. And I went into the conversation knowing I want to use apologetics here. I mean, this guy is totally a skeptic. I mean, saw no reason why he should believe the gospel. I want to use apologetics in my appeal to him. And so I started with something that I knew was really important to him. I asked him about his belief in justice. So, hey, why do you believe in, what do you actually believe about justice? I mean, I just sat there and listened while he told me that, this is what should matter for the victim. This is why we should defend her or him. And then I asked him a question that I think was pretty tough for him. I asked him why, from your atheistic worldview, what in your worldview leads you to believe we should have justice? All right, we'll talk about that more later, but the basic gist there is, if it's true, natural selection, the strong eat the weak, and that's how we advance, why in the world should we actually care about justice for the poor or weak, powerless? We had this really helpful conversation where we could just talk through his beliefs, and I was able to show him, this is why I believe in justice. Because I have a God who is just, and he actually tells us how to be just. Even more than that, I was able to take him to the gospel. This is how God has satisfied his justice. And it's through Christ dying on the cross in our place so that we can be saved. Guys, this time around, sharing the gospel with him, he was engaged. He was able to question, okay, maybe belief in God is reasonable. He was willing to at least listen okay, I see your beliefs even if I don't agree with them. In short, apologetics made a way for evangelism, which is something that we care about so much as a ministry. We must be sharing the gospel with people. So apologetics is very important, which that brings us to the third question. Hopefully, I've convinced you in a short 10 minutes that apologetics is useful. And that you have good reason to actually use it. If you want to read more, I would really recommend this first book I held up. It was really helpful for me. But now I want to talk about the next logical question. Okay, so we know what it is. We know why we should use it. But how do we actually use apologetics? How can I actually use this in my own life with people I know who are skeptics? Right? We probably all know people who we've talked to them and they've told us, that's ridiculous that you believe that. Or I can't believe why you'd be so judgy or so hateful or why you'd be so stupid to believe that. So how can you actually use apologetics in your own life? First, I want to talk about a little bit of the theoretical. There are 4 main camps. There are 4 main ways people think about apologetics. And I want to briefly tell you about each of them. First is a classicalist. The classicalist would say this: I will argue for God's existence and then prove the truth of Christianity. So I want you to believe just in general there is a God who exists, and then I'm going to argue particularly for Christ. There's an evidentialist. The evidentialist would say, I will show the historical evidences. Historical is your blank there. The historical evidences of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. So the evidentialist would say, hey, look, I took people straight to Jesus. In my apologetics, we started with Jesus, so we didn't have to waste any time. I went straight to the gospel. The third camp is a presuppositionalist. The presuppositionalist would say this: I will show people why they must presuppose that Christianity is correct. So the presuppositionalist would say, everything in your worldview that makes sense, you've actually borrowed from Christianity. And the presuppositionalist would argue, it's actually more faithful. I can't say maybe God exists, but we must say God does exist. And so now I'm going to show you why your worldview doesn't make sense, so you see why Christianity is the only answer. And then there's a fourth camp, the experientialist. The experientialist would say this: I will invite people to an experience and a story, your blank is story, that fits better with life. So the experientialist would say, I want you to come see my community. I want you to see how people actually live this out, and I want you to see how your life, the story of your life, makes the most sense through the grand story of the gospel. The gospel is the only story that makes sense of your story. So there are people who hold very tightly to one of these 4 camps. It's something that people cling to. This is my one camp sometimes, and say there's the one way you have to do it. I would like to humbly suggest that is not the best approach, and here's why. I think it should be more about the person and less about our preference. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine that you're talking to a friend, and your friend asks you, hey, will you draw me a map of how to get to Charlotte? You're excited. You're like, yes, I will draw you a map. So you immediately begin drawing, and you're starting in Atlanta, and you get all the roads. You trace it perfectly, and you label all of them with the directions. I mean, perfect. Like MapQuest wishes they were you. And then you go to them, you say, here's the map I made for you. And they look at it, and they're like, well, I can't use that. You look at them, and you're like, why not? Look, I spent so much time making this map. It's great. Like, you can use it. And they're like, okay, I see you're getting frustrated. I'm just going to go. Thank you for all your hard work. And they start to walk away. You're a little bit flustered. You're like, why will this person not just take my map? So you go and chase them down, and you just ask them, why won't you take this? And then finally they look at you and say, listen, you never even asked where I was coming from. Right? I'm driving down from Philadelphia, not coming up from Atlanta. And furthermore, I don't really use roads to navigate. I usually use landmarks to get where I'm going. My point is this. I think the way we use apologetics should be more about the person and less about our preference. Given that all throughout the Bible and all throughout history, different apologists have used plenty of apologetics, I think we have room to say it should be more about the person than our preference. One more thing before we get to our 4 questions that we're going to spend a lot of our time on. I want to give you 4 tips. So how can we actually do this? As we are using apologetics, what are just 4 basic tips, real applicable, that you can use in your life? 1, live it out. Brian was talking about this. We are Christians in word and deed. We are actors, which means we must speak it and do it. So live it out. 2nd, be humble. That's your blank right there, humble. If you hear me say one thing tonight, I want you to hear that. Be humble in the way that you use apologetics, and here's why. I think we all know someone who's been very prideful or rude in the way that they've tried to convince us of something. right? There's probably been someone on campus that you've seen or someone you've been trying to talk to that they are just mean and rude and arrogant. And the thing is, for us as Christians, we have no room to be prideful. You see the cross, it's not just our message, it's actually our model. It's not just the message, it's actually the model. You see, Jesus Christ dying on the cross is the ultimate example of humility. God himself coming down to be crucified, murdered for a bunch of sinners. He is the greatest example of humility. And so we don't just preach him, the way we preach him must model him. So be humble in your apologetics. Third, tell a story. The reason I say that, people are not just an intellect. We are not just propositional thinking. We have so many things that go up into what makes our beliefs. It's not just our intellect. Stories, narratives, emotions, experiences. There's so many parts of a person. And so I think we can capture the whole person by also using stories. Fourth, understand the culture. I really like this analogy. Maybe, especially for some of the guys in the room, if you've been in a room long enough, you start to forget just how bad it smells, right? There's an odor in the room that you have forgotten about. I think sometimes when we're sharing with people, there is an odor that they have been surrounded with their whole lives that they've just been used to. Right? There are things that make sense in their culture that, like, of course that's the way it is. Of course you should just keep your beliefs to yourself. Of course, that's what it means to be kind. Just don't share what you believe. Just keep it to you. That's the kind thing to do. And so what I think what we're able to do when we come in and we share the gospel, it's an unfamiliar odor that comes in on people. But I think it helps to point out to people, hey, there's actually a smell in the room that you forgot about. So if we understand the culture, I think we're actually able to do that with our apologetics. So understand the culture. Now for the 4 big questions. What I want to do, my goal is not just for you to leave here knowing, okay, apologetics is something that could be useful. I want to actually give you some tools that you can put in your tool belt. Then with real people, real conversations, you can actually answer some of these questions. So some real basic ways, real basic apologetics you can use with people. The general approach I'm going to use is called the inside-out model. So this is a matter of preference. You could argue Paul in the Areopagus, he uses this model. I think that's true. But I don't think we're bound. We've got to do apologetics just one way. But here's a helpful way that I think we can actually use it. So inside, what we can do is start with, here's what I affirm in what you believe. Here's where I can say, yes, I agree with you here. Yes. But then we actually want to then step outside of someone's worldview and say, hey, here are distinct Christian beliefs that we have. So I'm going to try to follow that model as we answer all 4 of these questions. So buckle up, 4 questions. Let's fly through them. First one, how could there be just one true religion? I think sometimes people extend that question. Don't you know it's so dangerous clinging to your one religion so tightly? Haven't you seen how that divides people so much? Haven't you seen in history how much that damages people? Look how many corruptions have been propagated by religion. Don't you know it's just arrogant to think that only your religion could be correct? Here's where I think we can step inside of someone's worldview. I think we can admit, yeah, religion is divisive. I think the Bible supports that. Actually, it does divide people. And even more than that, I think you're right. Hey, we need peace. I think there are 3 things that people could do with religion to try to stop it. One is outlaw religion. Say, it's not allowed. Government enforced, no more. I think history shows us that doesn't work. Think of communist China. Government cracks down and says, no more Christianity. And what happened to the church? It grew like crazy, right? It's spread. So it's not logical to say we're going to outlaw religion. So some people might say, okay, we're going to condemn religion. So we're not going to outlaw it, but we're just going to tell you, hey, it's wrong. Why in the world would you just hold to that? I think one common way that people might try to do this, say it's wrong to hold to one specific belief system, is pluralism. So pluralism is this belief that people have. Every religion's right. Everyone's right. Everyone's got a part of a part of the big picture. And so we just all need to come together. It's arrogant to think only you have the truth. Just everyone's got some of it. If we would just all come together, stop holding to your one religion is right, then now we could finally have peace. I think a common analogy that people like to use is that of an elephant. So it might go something like this. Christianity has the foot of the elephant. Buddhism has got a tusk. Islam has a tail. Everyone's got part of it. But if you guys would just start working together, you can actually see the whole thing. Here's the issue I have with that the pluralist is actually claiming to have the whole truth that they say it's arrogant to have, right? The pluralist is making the exclusive claim that they condemn in other people. They're saying, I have the whole truth, and you need to come over, convert to my way of seeing things. So they are actually making an exclusive claim that they say you can't make. Third thing that people try to do with religion, privatize it. Radically privatize it. Just keep it to yourself. It's great. If you want to believe that, sure, that's fine. You have rights. But listen, don't bring it into the public sphere. Just keep it to yourself. Here's why I would argue that can't work. It's because the way that we live is based upon beliefs. Everything you do is rooted in an identity, a belief system. And the outworking of that is the way that you live. So it's unreasonable to tell someone, hey, just keep it to yourself, because in fact you can't. We can't pragmatically just say, everyone just get along, just agree to do one thing, and actually what you believe is going to change the way you live. So now I think then we can step outside of someone's worldview and say, actually Christianity offers something so much better. Christianity with a Savior who died for his followers. He made a radically inclusive claim. And his claim was this: anyone can be saved. It's not about how hard you work. It's not about where you come from. It's not about the pilgrimage you make. Right? If you will simply trust in Jesus, you can be saved. It's incredibly inclusive, radically inclusive, that we see the history of Christianity in an oppressed, in a society that didn't value women. That we see this radical, in the early days of the church, women finally, they had a voice. They could come and be saved. No longer were they excluded from Christianity. It's radically inclusive. And more than that, I think Jesus' call for forgiveness gives us the greatest tools for world peace. You see, our Savior, while he died on the cross, there on the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When we've been forgiven, we must forgive people. In fact, Christianity, it gives us the greatest tools possible to have peace in the world. So I think that's an inside-out approach to how could there just be one true religion. Second question. How could God be good with so much evil in the world? I think this question is really personal for a lot of us. Cancer, divorce, discrimination, mental illness. How in the world could God be good with all of that? I think that's where we can step inside of someone's worldview and say, yes, suffering is bad. Evil really exists. There are things that are broken in the world that need to be healed. And we can affirm, yes, there is actually things that are broken and things that are evil that need to be mended or need to be stopped. But here's what I would argue. I believe that suffering makes just as much a case for God as anyone would like to say it makes against him. Here's why. So someone who's an atheist who says there is no God. So atheists would typically hold to evolution and explain the way we got here is through evolution. And I think the idea of evil presents a unique problem for an atheist. Here's how. If you believe, okay, evolution, Big Bang, evolution, and that's how we got here today, natural selection, the strong eat the weak, and that's how we advance as a society, it's how we get better, then my question for you is why in the world, where's your morality coming from? Not to say atheists are just immoral people, but no. How does your worldview actually tell you should be moral? If the way that we get better as a society is the strong eat the weak, so let the rich oppress the poor, right? Let the people with a voice silence the voiceless. Let the powerful crush the weak. Why? Because that's how we advance. We are evolving as a species. I think that presents a unique problem. Even more than that, I think the atheist is forced to answer, how could things be good or bad if there's no God telling us what is right or wrong? Here's what I mean. I think most people who are atheists would tell you something along these lines. Well, we've evolved. We've evolved to have ethics. We've developed this cultural understanding of this is what is ethical. Okay, well, if that's true, then how do you know your culture is right? What room do you have when another culture believes differently to look at them and say, my culture is right and yours is wrong? I think some people would say, well, it's just what the whole world believes. So, okay, wait. Genocide. Like when a whole country gets in on the whole genocide thing and says, the majority says, yes, this is okay. We can look in and say, no, that's wrong. Even though your culture has risen to this place to say, this is correct. No, we would step in and say, no, that's wrong. Well, some people might say, okay, that's just one country. Well, the majority of the world agreed that was wrong. What about racism? Almost every culture in the world, you will find racism. Wherever you go. It is global. And yet we can still sit here and say, despite the fact that every culture practices it, it's wrong. You see, I think evil, I think an atheist is going to struggle to claim there is actually such a thing as suffering and such a thing as evil. Because I don't think your worldview is able to get you there. Evil and morality are just as much a problem for the atheist as they are for the Christian. Here's the thing. On the other hand, I would imagine for someone who's walked through suffering in this room, all this theory probably sounds a little bit impersonal. But I think for a Christian, I think Christianity provides us the best tools for how to get through suffering, specifically through the suffering of Jesus for our redemption and resurrection. I'm going to preach here for a minute. Here's the thing. Jesus, he suffered more pain than anyone in history. We all know how tough it is to lose a close relationship. But listen, Jesus on the cross, he had an eternal relationship. So imagine how hard it is to lose a relationship you've had for a year or a decade or your whole life. As hard as that is to lose that. This relationship that Jesus had with the Father and the Spirit, he had for eternity past. But there on the cross, what happened to Jesus is he took our sin. In fact, the wrath of God for sin was poured out on him. And so Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Right? There's this tear in the relationship between the Father and the Son. See, Jesus, he experienced the most excruciating pain anyone could experience. Not just physical pain, not just nails being driven through his hands, but no, spiritual pain. A relationship being broken. And what that means for us is that Jesus knows what you're feeling. Jesus, he knows your pain. He has been there. He has suffered so much. So he can sympathize with you. Because not only that, it's not just our redemption. It's not just the fact that Jesus died so we can be redeemed and be forgiven through faith. We believe in resurrection. Right? Jesus, he didn't just stay dead. He rose again. Here's why that's so important for us. Have you ever thought about what resurrection actually means in your life? In heaven, every wound gets healed. No more cancer. No more death. No more broken relationships. No more discrimination. No more mental illness. In heaven, everything's healed. But get this, guys, it's not just like what was lost is given back to us. It's made better than it was to begin with. Here's what I mean. It's not just that you get that relationship back that was broken. No. That relationship is going to be better than it ever was. God doesn't just give it back. He restores it. It's made perfect. That body that was ridden with cancer or that mental illness that would never go away. Listen, in heaven, it's not just that things are made better. No. You're given a perfect body. It's made better than it ever was. And the best thing about about resurrection is that we will stand there and be able to look at the face of God and be perfectly satisfied in his presence. It's resurrection. We will know eternal joy forever. Christianity gives us our best tools to deal with suffering. Third question. Hasn't science just disproven God? Haven't we gotten to a point as a society where haven't we gotten there where we are committed to reason now, right? We've moved past the days of faith. So someone's going to say now, I believe in science and reason. Why would I exchange that for your so-called faith that you can't prove? Here's where I think, can step inside of someone's worldview and say, yes, science is a good thing. Science has helped us advance so much. If you have a phone in your pocket right now, I think everyone nod along and say, yes, technology has helped us a lot. We are thankful for it. But then we can actually step outside of someone's worldview and say something like this, that the claim that science can prove the existence of God is actually a philosophical presupposition. Here's what I mean. To say that science can prove whether or not God exists, that's a philosophical claim, not a scientific one. There is no test you can create that will verify whether or not it is true that science can prove the existence of God. And of course you can't. It's a philosophical claim that people are making, that my science can prove whether or not God exists. People are lifting up science. I think the atheist might say something like this. Well, what about the tooth fairy? Sure, okay, you can't prove whether or not God exists. You can't prove whether or not the tooth fairy exists. Why is that a valid reason? Well, I think Christians are able to make an appeal and say, no. We have reason to believe this. Look at the historical evidences of Jesus. I mean, his brother converted. The Apostle Paul, who hated him, right? He becomes a Christian. We have 500 people testifying, I saw him. This isn't just a myth people made up later, right? It's not a legend. A legend is something that 200 years ago, an example of a legend would be 200 years ago, there's a man who floated above Charlotte. You can't prove that. I can tell you it's true, sure. But you're like, there's no evidence. We can't go back and say, yeah, I mean, that happened or not. But no. If I say 20 years ago, a man floated above Charlotte, it's like, wait. There were cops on duty, right? People were writing reports. We have newspapers, right? It's not a legend. Right? With the death of Jesus, people immediately following his death are saying, yes, he rose again. Right? We have historical evidence to actually believe this did actually happen. Furthermore, the claim that science can prove the existence of God is it can't be scientifically proven, is therefore a leap of faith. Your blank there's faith. I think it's funny to me that someone might say, you have faith, I have reason. I have a problem with that. We all exercise faith in the way we live. I think ethics are a great example of that. Right? Choose your ethical issue that you care about. Let's pick an easy one. And I think we would all nod along and say, yes, women should be treated as equals. Everyone says, yes, that is true. But prove to me using your science that is true. And yet you know it is, right? You live that way. You have to. You know it's true. Why? It's your faith. You know, if you're an atheist, then you know, yes, this is true, and so I'm going to live that way. In fact, your life is based around, you are doing things in your life that you have faith this is the right thing to do, whether or not you can prove it. So I think everyone exercises faith. It's not simply reason versus faith. Furthermore, people say that the resurrection of Jesus, I could never believe in a miracle. That's ridiculous. Of course, miracles don't happen. Well, no. You're assuming something. You're assuming God does not exist. Right? If God exists, miracles like the resurrection of Jesus are completely reasonable. So I think that's how we can respond to someone about science, and we can actually show them, listen, I have a book. I have a book that has more manuscripts. It has more historical authenticity to it than any other book in humanity. And this book is giving me my beliefs. It's a book that God himself wrote. I think that's how we respond to someone who says, hasn't science disproven God? Okay, last question. How could you believe in a God who sends people to hell? I think this might be the toughest question that we're talking about tonight. I remember a friend of mine, Carly, in high school. She grew up Jewish, I guess Jewish. Um, I remember a friend of mine, Ashley, who's a Christian, sat down and was sharing the gospel with her, and just walked her through, this is God, and this is what we believe about man's sinful nature, and this is Jesus dying in our place, and this is why we should have faith in him. And at some point, Carly asked her, do you believe, if I'm not a Christian, that I'm going to hell? And Ashley, in the most loving way she knew how, told her, yes, that's what the Bible teaches. And I think what Carly heard in that moment was, you think I am worthless. You think I have no rights. You think I'm so low and unimportant that I deserve hell? It is incredibly tough to talk about hell with people. But here's how I think we can actually have that conversation in a loving way. I think we can go inside someone's worldview and say, hey, I think we can all agree that people do things that are morally wrong. We can all nod along and say, yes, there are things we do that are actually wrong and shouldn't be done. Even more than that, injustices, I think everyone agrees, injustices should be stopped. They're an issue. Then we can step outside of someone's worldview and actually point out, well, you see, Christians believe that moral wrongdoings, they don't just deserve a punishment now. They don't just deserve to be corrected now. They actually deserve to be corrected eternally. Someone might look at you and say, how could you be so close-minded to believe that God would punish people eternally? Well, wait, hit pause for a moment. Why am I so close-minded for believing that a punishment, rather than just needing to be executed in the moment, is actually one that carries for eternity? What's so close-minded about extending the length? I think we agree there is actually something wrong that needs to be corrected, but it's more personal than that, right? It's not just that Christians believe that every moral wrong deserves punishment, not only now, but also eternally. The blank right there is eternally. You see, because of God's divine justice, every wrong will be made right. Right? Every evil in the world will be stopped. Every wrong will be corrected. Right? God, he actually cares enough to say, there's something wrong and I'm going to do something about it. See, but what Christians believe is that, in fact, the evil isn't just around us. The injustice, it's not just what other people do. There's actually injustice inside of us. We have a doctrine of sin that teaches that our hearts are wicked. There's something broken here. But because of God's divine justice, see, every wrong will be made right. And what that does for a Christian is we have a unique ability to practice nonviolence. Here's what I mean. If we really believe that God's judgment will be enacted, then I don't need to seek vengeance. I don't need to come after you. People might say, well, you're God of judgment. You Christians are just going to become so judgmental and hateful and just become violent towards other people. No. Because God is the judge, I don't need to be. It is not my role in life to be someone else's judge. Right? God is their judge. And so I think that's where we can say we actually have a unique ability to practice nonviolence and love people. I don't have to take vengeance on you. Furthermore, because God is our source of joy, those who reject God will be separated from their source of joy for eternity. The only thing you can call that is hell. If someone chooses to reject God, someone rejects him, right? What's more fair than God saying, you will actually be separated from the joy of my presence? This isn't injustice. This is God giving people what they asked for. You want an eternity free from me? Here you go. And being separated from that joy could only be called hell. To go back to the conversation with Carly, I think if I could go back and talk to her about this conversation about hell, I would want her to see, I think she felt like this is an attack on my worth. I would want her to see that, no, actually God thinks so highly of you. God valued you so much that he came down and died for you. See, we have a God who cares about each of us so much. He actually died in our place. And because of Jesus' perfect life, his death, and his resurrection, so we can actually be saved. And because of salvation, for eternity, even though we don't deserve it, for eternity, we can be satisfied with God in heaven, where every wrong will be made right. And so that's why we believe in a God who judges.